Hello boys and girls, it's Grumpy Granny and I'm back again to tell you another exciting story from my family history. This one's a bit of a doozy, I might say, and has links to a very famous and infamous character from Australia's history. So let's get into it, shall we? So I would like to start off by introducing you to Ada May Matthews. When I was doing my family history research, word trickled down to me that Ada here ran in the same circles as Squizzy Taylor, and we'll talk about Squizzy a bit more later on. But I want to share with you a story about Ada's husband, Frank, who unfortunately ended his own life in 1933. And this was after a particularly interesting episode in Melbourne's history, I shall say. So, shall we have a look at that? So here's a short little rundown of history that I wrote about Frank Coombe, or Francis Hugh Coombe, which was his full name, born in 1883, that I wrote back in 2012 and put it up on Ancestry. So Frank had a fair bit of tragedy and things happened in his early life that probably made him feel quite alone, I'm thinking. And so we'll have a look. So Frank was the 12th child of James and Emily Coombe, so he did have quite a few siblings. He was born in Timor in 1883, and he would have only been about 2 or 3 years old when the family left Timor and came into Druin in Melbourne's outer suburbs. He spent his school days in Druin, but when he was about 8, his father died tragically. So that was the start of things going astray for Frank. The next year, his eldest brother left for New Zealand, and I dare say Frank thought that he would never see him again. And 4 years later, his older sister took her own life. Frank would have only been about 13 by then. And it's hard to know what effects these tragic events had on his life, but they would have had to have had some effect. Little is known of his life between when he left school and when he married. We know that he was a blacksmith, so perhaps he worked with his brother Alan, who had a blacksmith's shop in Druin. Not entirely sure, but that certainly is a possibility. It is known that he was a blacksmith in North Melbourne by about 1908. That particular record would have come out of the electoral rolls, I'm sure. But in 1907, the year before, he married Ada May Matthews, the kindly-looking grandmother lady that I showed you at the start. So they married. Later, Frank gave up blacksmithing and managed Starkey's woodyard. He was a keen fisherman and often came home with large batches of flathead, which he and his daughters would distribute among his friends and neighbours. He also enjoyed going into the country hunting and shooting rabbits. Now, Frank was attacked and hit on the head with an axe and spent some time in hospital in 1933. And it wasn't long after that Frank took his own life, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, which is all part of the story. Frank and Ada had 3 daughters altogether, and Ada died at the ripe old age of 91 in 1979, so she went on and lived quite a long life. So this is the only known photo that I have of Frank, and this is him with his daughter Doris, and she married in 1930, so this is only 3 years before he passed away. So yes, that's a photo of Frank. I did try very hard to find positive proof that our friend Frank did actually have connections with Squizzy Taylor. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything definitive. However, I did come across this article, which this is not long before he took his own life. And, you know, when you go through the details of this story, and given the stories that I was told, it's certainly not out of the realm of possibilities that he did. So let's have a look. This particular story is from the Melbourne Herald, and it's dated the 12th of May 1933. And this is how the story goes. Starts off, party opened in beer, which kind of thought that was an interesting heading. Ended in alleged axe blow, wounding charge. That a social evening in Kensington, which is an inner suburb of Melbourne, was ended by an axe blow was alleged before Judge Foster and a jury in General Sessions today, when George Dugdale, 29, of Smith Street, Kensington, was charged with having inflicted grievous bodily harm on Frank Hugh Coombe of Ascot Vale. The prosecutor for the King, Mr Morris Cusson, told the jury that Coombe had been invited to tea at Dugdale's house on January 15th. After tea, they drank beer and danced to the gramophone, continued Mr. Cusson. Coombe went out and on his way back into the house passed Mrs. Dugdale in the porch and Dugdale in the kitchen. He called out to Dugdale, "How are you, son?" Later, and then the next heading goes, blood-stained axe handle. Later, Dugdale came up to Coombe and told him to get out of his house, at the same time striking him a violent blow on the cheek with some weapon with a handle about 2 foot 6 inches long. Coombe could not definitely say that the weapon was an axe, but police found an axe with blood-stained handle in the yard. Well, I guess that's enough evidence of that, isn't it? Coombe was taken to Melbourne Hospital, where he was operated on. His cheek had been laid open, the cheekbone fractured and part of the jawbone broken. Later the same morning, the police wireless patrol visited Dugdale's house and found him hiding behind the bathroom door. His head was severely cut, which he explained by saying that he had fallen on some broken bottles in his yard. Finally, he admitted to the constables that he had received his injuries when his wife threw a jug at him. Nice. He also told them that 3 or 4 dozen bottles of beer had been drunk at the party. Cross-examined by Mr. J.M. Colletti for Dugdale, Coombe said he was walking back to the house after he had been wounded. Mr. Colletti: "Not to resume a fight?" Coombe: "That was my intention, ha 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 ha. I was sober, but Dugdale was drunk," he added. Mr. Colletti: "Did you catch hold of Mrs. Dugdale and attempt to drag her into a shed in the yard?" Coombe: "No." Goodness gracious me. Mr. Colletti to the jury: "It will be sworn that Coombe came through the passage from the yard, calling out, 'She was looking for it.'" Coombe said, "That is not true." I think there's missing a bit of the story in there somewhere. Accused and wife in the box. Dugdale, in evidence, denied that he had struck Coombe with an axe. Coombe, he said, came down the passage from the yard calling out, "She was asking for it." They came to blows in the yard and he hit Coombe with a piece of wood. Coombe's face was cut and the witness's head was also injured. Mrs. Ruby Dugdale said Coombe had attempted to assault her. She called for help but her husband punched her. Nice people. She fell against the door and cut the back of her head. Mr. Cusson: "Despite the fact that you called for help, your husband hit you?" Mrs. Dugdale: "Yes." "Apparently he suspected you?" "Yes." Further cross-examined, Mrs. Dugdale said she had not told the police the truth on the night of the party because she did not wish her name to be dragged into it. The hearing is not finished. Well, let's find out what did happen in the end. So the following Monday, the 15th of May 1933, the Herald newspaper published this little article. "Axe blow at party." Subheading: "Unlawful wounding," says jury. A verdict of guilty of unlawful wounding was given by the jury in General Sessions today in the case in which George Dugdale, 29, formerly of Smith Street, Kensington, was charged with having struck Frank Hugh Coombe of Ascot Vale with an axe at a party in Dugdale's home on the evening of January 15th. Dugdale was charged with having inflicted grievous bodily harm on Coombe and, alternatively, with having unlawfully wounded Coombe. The jury acquitted Dugdale on the major charge but found him guilty of unlawfully wounding, and he was remanded for sentence by Judge Foster. Well, there you go. So following on for that, there was a final article about George Dugdale and his sentence. So, friends who quarrelled, it says, and this is in the Argus on the 18th of May. Convicted man given a chance. "You are extremely lucky that you did not kill your friend and that you were not charged with more serious offence," said Judge Foster in General Sessions today to George Dugdale, aged 29 years, labourer of Boulevards Road, North Melbourne, who had been found guilty of having unlawfully wounded Frank Hugh Coombe of Mooney Street, Ascot Vale. Judge Foster said that Dugdale had been drinking and, as the act was not premeditated, he would give him a chance. Dugdale was sentenced to imprisonment for 2 years, but Judge Foster made an order suspending the sentence upon Dugdale entering into a bond of £30 to be of good behaviour for 3 years and to abstain from intoxicating liquor for that period. So there we go. That was what happened to George for hitting Frank with the axe. So quite an interesting story, but still a lot of unanswered questions. So what was the fight really about? Was, Frank having a bit of slap and tickle with Mrs. Dugdale, and then Coombes found out about it? Were his advances wanted or unwanted? Who knows? But quite obviously it was an interesting party, I dare say. Sadly, Frank took his own life not long after all this happened, and not long after the court case. So on the 15th of July 1930, he committed suicide by gunshot. There was an inquest held on the 27th of July. I don't actually have the details of the inquest. It is something that the next time I am able to go to our state archives, I will be getting a copy of that inquest to see what the actual circumstances were surrounding his death. I think what they say at the inquest might actually answer some more questions about the whole scenario. Now, you might notice a slightly different setup today to what I've been normally using for my storytelling, and that is because StreamYard, in their infinite wisdom, suddenly to double their fees, which meant that, the fee that I was originally paying US $25 for, which actually in effect is closer to 50 in Australian dollars, then finished up being $88 Australian, and just way too much. And I don't even get that much a month from YouTube, so I certainly wasn't going to pay that sort of money. And so many of us that do use StreamYard have been looking at alternatives. And the alternative that I'm so far working with is a free program called OBS. And I'm going to have a go at using that for recording, which is what I'm doing today, and also for doing some live streaming. And I've had a couple of little practice runs with a few teething issues, and I think it's just a matter of getting everything ready and getting used to it and all that sort of thing. But, I probably need to watch a few more YouTube tutorials on the stuff. So I thank you for your patience on that. Now, the other interesting thing that I do want to tell you is that I am starting a new YouTube channel. Yes, I'll have 3 channels then, won't I? So this particular channel is going to be called Grumpy Granny's Gruesome World. And you may wonder, yes, you may. Well, most of you are probably well and truly aware of the fact that I'm a bit of a true crime junkie, and I like the odd gruesome story, and, this is a good segue into that, isn't it? Just sort of, telling you this little story, and it's a little bit gruesome, but not too much. So I'm actually going to be putting this story on my new channel. It'll be the first story to go up. Not quite sure when that will happen, but it will happen soon. I've actually, the channel's made, and then I'll be doing some true crime stuff and some very interesting and very gruesome stories. What made me decide to do it is that there is a particular story that I do want to tell, and that is the story of Catherine Knight. Now, this is one of the books that's been written about her. This is just the cover, by Sandra Lee, and it is called Beyond Bad, and if you read the subtitle, may give you a bit of a hint. The Life and Crimes of Catherine Knight, Australia's Hannibal. And yes, they are referring to Hannibal Lecter. And I'm not going to go into the details of that here on this channel, because when I started to dig into the details, so this story occurred in an area well known to Octo, and he was the one that gave me a tip into looking up the story, so I did. And I was going to do a story from history for it on this channel, only to discover that it was extremely gruesome, and I just didn't think it was fitting for this channel. I thought, well, what do I want to do? I really want to present this story. It's an Australian story. It's an amazing story. I can't believe it hasn't been made into a movie yet, but I can tell you all about that when I do that story. So I decided the best thing was to have another channel where I do all those gruesome stories. So I'm going to be doing that, and hopefully I'll be starting to get some content up on that channel soon, so keep an eye out for that. So now on to Squizzy Taylor. Now I'm just going to be giving you a bit of an overview of Squizzy Taylor's life for now, and when you go over to the new channel, you will get a bit more of an in-depth, deep dive into Squizzy. Now, some of you may have heard of Squizzy. I'm not sure how well known he was interstate, but he was a gangster from Melbourne. He was born in 1888 and died in 1927. He was also one of the subjects of the series of Underbelly, although I do fear that they made him a little more glamorous in that series than he was in real life. Squizzy was actually quite a little man. I don't know, let me just see. Does it tell me how tall he was? He wasn't very tall. I'll see if I can find that out. But he wasn't very tall, he was little, and he was a bit of a thug. He appeared repeatedly and prominently in Melbourne news media, and all to do with suspicions and accusations and some convictions related to a gang war that started in 1919. He absconded from bail and went into hiding from the police in 1921 through to 22, and then he was involved in a bank robbery where a bank manager was murdered in 1923. He had a very fearsome reputation in the 1920s Melbourne. He was described as a spiv, which is the Australian equivalent of American bootleggers. His crimes ranged from pickpocketing, assault and shopbreaking to armed robbery and murder. He also derived income from sly grog selling, two-up schools, illegal bookmaking, extortion, prostitution. In his later years, he's believed to have moved into cocaine dealing, although I don't know if there's actually been any real proof of that. His father died when he was 13, and at that stage he began working in the stables of a horse trainer, and then as a jockey. That's how little he was, in Melbourne's inner city pony circuit. But he soon started getting himself into trouble. His first criminal conviction was recorded in March 1906 at the age of 17, when he was sentenced to 21 days imprisonment for the theft of a fly front grey Melton cloth overcoat. I will say, Squizzy always liked to be impeccably dressed and always wanted to be very well dressed and liked to think that he could rub shoulders with the best, and that was probably, that early theft was probably an indication of that. Squizzy Taylor was wounded in a gunfight with a rival gangster, John Snowy Cutmore, in Barclay Street, Carlton, and died at St Vincent's Hospital, Fitzroy, on 27th of October 1927. So yeah, there's a whole story to do with that. He was actually Squizzy, even though he had such a reputation. People still loved him. He had a real charisma to him. And so he was buried with Anglican rites in the Brighton Cemetery in a double plot with his eldest daughter. And on the morning of the funeral, police were needed to control a large crowd of onlookers who gathered at the Taylor's house, swarming around the waiting hearse in morbid curiosity. Squizzy's gravesite has become a major attraction since he's had TV series and movies made about him, and you'll see there are some pictures of those floating through the thing too, so yeah, all good. Alright, so that's all I'm going to tell you about Squiz. But yes, so that's the sort of circles that Ada May and Frank were believed to run in. Look, I assume that was pre-having children. I would have hoped that they'd settled down by then. I'm not entirely sure that they really did 100% settle down, given the events of the night of the axe attack. What else can I tell you? Yeah, that's probably all as far as history goes for today. So I hope you enjoyed this particular history story. I should be tired today because it's daylight savings. It's the first day of daylight savings and I missed an hour's sleep. I have to get used to that, so I'll be tired for the next week because I'll be getting out of bed. I'll think that I'm getting out of bed at, 7 o'clock, and I'll actually be getting out of bed at 6 o'clock by the sun. I like daylight savings, but it does usually take me a week or two to get used to it, so yeah. I hope everybody's doing well, and I will see you next time. Hooroo, boys and girls.